All right, so welcome to Meditation 101. This is a 4-week course. I don't know if you heard that it's storming here. We just had some thunder. So if my internet drops out, I will endeavor to be back as quickly as possible. It's thundering and lightning pretty significantly out there right now. Um,
Okay.
but I'll try. Um, Okay, so this is Meditation 101, and it's a 4-week course. We'll meet the remaining Friday nights in August at this time. And then the there's 3 introductory courses that we offer. And typically, historically speaking, they have been on Fridays like this class. Starting next month in September, those introductory classes will move to Tuesdays. So the next introductory course is Introduction to Mindfulness. And Venerable Katie Cole will be offering that from 7 to 8:30 on the Tuesday nights in September. And then Buddhism in a Nutshell is the third of the 3 introductory courses that will be offered in October on Tuesdays again. So you're switching from Fridays to Tuesdays. If you're
I've taken
interested.
them all already, but
Okay,
I
great.
will take them again. I've taken meditation 101 a couple of times, but I just like to meditate with someone else.
Sure. Great, great. All right. Well, so yeah, so you're familiar with the course and the other courses. So as you are familiar, Meditation 101, its goal ultimately is mainly to help a person understand what are the essential things that they need to understand in order to really have a successful meditation practice on their own. What are the kind of fundamental aspects of constructing a meditation practice? In a person's daily life. So we will begin by talking then about, uh, you know, the word meditation itself, the word that is translated into English, because our center is coming from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And so everything that we present is based on how the teachings are understood and how they are practiced, particularly in that tradition. If you were to go to a Zen center or a Theravadan center, there would certainly be some differences here and there about how things are presented, how things are understood. But we do present everything from the Tibetan Buddhist perspective. And so when we say meditation, what's being translated is the Tibetan word gom, Gom. You may be familiar with the word Gompa, Gompa, which is the place of meditation. So in a Buddhist center, they will talk about um, teachings are happening in the Gompa. Or even if there's a retreat and it's not a Buddhist center, but it's just the place where people are gathering for the meditations, they will refer to as the Gompa for the purposes of that retreat. The place of meditation is the Gompa. And Gom is the practice of meditation. And what Gom in English, what it means is to become familiar, to familiarize the mind. So in the Gompa is where through study, through meditations, through listening to teachings, we become familiar. We become familiar with the teachings. And in particular, generally speaking, we want to become more and more familiar with virtue. We want to become more and more familiar with constructive, positive, beneficial states of mind. The theory of meditation could be understood as uh, taking time out of hopefully every day for a person to engage in this formal process of directing their mind, focusing their mind on virtue, on constructive states of mind, beneficial states of mind, because the deeper that familiarity is, the more it becomes a person's baseline state. The more naturally, spontaneously, deeply familiar we are with love, with compassion, with generosity, with patience, with ethics, with wisdom, etc., then the easier it is to tap into that state of mind in our daily life. The more it will naturally be expressed in our relationships with others, our interactions, even with strangers. And, there are other benefits as well to, because the process, as we say, familiarization, which means that we have to deal with distraction. If we, just like when we're trying to study anything, what if we're trying to familiarize our mind with, physics or chemistry for an exam, then we go not to the Gompa, but we go to the library because it's quiet, it's conducive to study, and we concentrate the mind on that body of knowledge, that which with which we are trying to become more familiar. And as a person who's a meditator or a person who is studying will tell you, the mind will wander, the mind will kind of rebel against that focused attention. So, both people, whether you're a studier or a meditator, you have to learn how to deal with distraction. You have to learn how to move the mind back continually to that which with you are trying to become more and more deeply familiar. It's true for a meditator, and it's true for anyone who is just trying to learn any body of knowledge. And really, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying, from the Buddhist perspective, we're trying to learn the Buddhist body of knowledge, that, the collected works, the collected teachings of the historical Buddha. Or a person could choose to think of meditation as a skill, and they could apply it to a different spiritual tradition or a different wisdom tradition and use the general skill to become familiar with a different body of knowledge. What a person chooses to include in their daily meditation practice is completely up to that person. But as I say, our center is from the Buddhist perspective, and broadly speaking, that's what those are the examples that we will be using. Even though I would say it's broadly applicable to anyone who wishes to just develop more love, more compassion. These broadly um, useful, beneficial states of mind. So that is ultimately the purpose of why we meditate, is because right now, not having meditated, not having spent much time actively cultivating virtue, our familiarity with those constructive states of mind is not as strong as it could be. And unfortunately, it's easier to be familiar with looking out for, just our own interests. It's easier to see the world through the lens of more of a narrow perspective. And so we're quite familiar with that. We do have a lot of maybe not intentional sitting formal effort, but because it comes so easily, we spend a lot of time inadvertently developing that familiarity, those not so positive familiarities. And with this, intentional practice, we are trying to flip that familiarity that already exists to the states of mind that are not as constructive, not as beneficial, and instead replace that with new constructive, beneficial tendencies, habits, states of mind, familiarities. That's the general theory of, why in Buddhism meditation is so emphasized, because it trains the mind in a constructive, virtuous, positive direction. Did you have any thoughts or questions so far?
No.
So meditation, then, we would say that it's different from just kind of relaxing, just sort of, um, you know, uh, engaging in maybe some breathing exercises or trying to de-stress from the day. The goal has a more long-term focus. Certainly, I think Buddhism would agree with the idea, the understanding that when we have a meditation practice, we receive those short-term, more temporary benefits. We might sleep uh, better. We might have, more spaciousness in the mind in a general, daily, um, sort of every day. And therefore, we might find it easier to deal with stress, deal with anxiety. Um, but from the Buddhist perspective, meditation is really a technology, an inner technology that's directly related with unlocking a much deeper um, capacity of the mind, a much deeper potential of the mind for a real flourishing of our potential that it goes so far beyond just trying to have less stress or be able to have a calm, more peaceful state of mind. Those are, again, I would say, side effects, but they're not, from the Buddhist perspective, they're not the goal. They're not what a person is engaging in meditation for. And, of course, if that is a person's entryway into having a practice, then, there's no issue with that, no problem. But I think, it can be useful to keep in mind this larger perspective that, this is a system that's coming to us from the historical Buddha, who is someone who did transform in an extremely profound and deep way, transform the quality of his mind at that time, and then taught this system for that purpose, for all of us to benefit in that way, rather than only looking at it as a short-term or temporary sort of benefit. And it's also true that not all, from the Buddhist perspective, not all topics of meditation or not all ways of meditating in the moment actually could or maybe would lead a person in that moment to having that greater peace of mind. We might be confronting sort of um, uncomfortable truths about our experience, and that can be unsettling. For example, we may meditate on our own mortality would be a potential topic of meditation, and that as a person is really deeply dealing with that, really coming to terms, confronting that head on in that moment, it's not comfortable. It can stir up emotions and thoughts and feelings, and can lead to discomfort. But the goal of that particular meditation, let's say, isn't just to be morbid, isn't just to, think, well, everything is pointless. We're all going to die. It's not that at all. It's really to um, overcome the kind of lackadaisical attitude that might creep into our practice by not confronting the limited amount of time that we have to really make this spiritual progress. If we just approach our lives from the perspective of, there's always more time, we can always put it off, then we probably will put it off. We would all say in conversation, we would all, agree with the idea, the concept that we won't live forever. But at the same time, every day that we wake up, for that day, we are all completely convinced that our death will not happen on that day. And then we wake up the next day and we're again completely convinced. So in that way, we stack up thousands and thousands of days, each one of which death is always in the future. Death is always something that is going to happen at some indeterminate future time. And there are drawbacks, to that. And when we confront those, uh, that process can be disconcerting, but the benefit, the long-term benefit for our spiritual growth, really, that's what we're after. We're after this long-term perspective, this long-term benefit, and not just only searching for kind of feeling good in the moment. What is it that can help me feel good in this one moment? And that's why I might choose to meditate. I think, many people would say that a long-term dedicated practice does help them feel better, really irrespective of the topics, that are in those meditations. But as you're confronting, as you're working with some of these aspects of wisdom, um, it can be a challenging process. But those long-term benefits, I would say, the idea is that ultimately it's worth it. It's worth dealing with that in order to gain those really long-term benefits. Okay, so as I said, this is talking about formal daily practice, is kind of the main emphasis of this course. And so there is an understanding of what we ought to be doing with our physical body. How do we set our session of meditation up for success? First, beginning with looking at our posture. And the idea behind thinking about the posture is that as we develop the skill of meditation, then the mind naturally becomes more and more subtle as we focus our attention away from what is happening in the environment, as we move our mind, our attention inward, then we are withdrawing our engagement with the external world. Typically, our engagement is quite active, trying to get information about what's happening around us through our ears, our eyes, our, physical sense powers, and so on. We're trying to engage in a very, very active way. But with meditation, we withdraw that attention, we pull it back, and we move the mind more and more inward. And so, in the body over time, there can be a really strong relaxation response that can arise after, maybe a number of months, a couple of years of a sustained practice. What people find is that their bodies have this, really strong relaxation response that happens. Uh, and so if we don't pay any attention to how we set up the physical body in the session from the very beginning, then when this physical relaxation, begins to happen in the body, the body can just sort of, it can tip over. It can be very unstable. Um, Also, we may be subject to more aches and pains than is necessary if the body isn't in a very firm, very stable position. If something is a little bit out of alignment, then that can also be a distraction, the aches and pains that might arise in the body. So there's many reasons why from the very beginning we should try to make an effort of cultivating a really, really stable position, one that can adapt to the presence of this relaxation response in the body without, as I said, tipping over, without kind of anything unpleasant happening in the body. Because that may not happen for months, for years, but if we don't learn good habits from the very beginning, then when that does start to happen, we may find that we need to correct our posture. We may need to learn how, now that we're actually dealing with this relaxation in the body, we may need to learn a new process and then we may have to unlearn habits that were not so beneficial. So if we can just get it all going in the right direction from day one, then we're setting ourselves up for long-term success over, years and years, decades of practice. So ideally, this posture is occurring on a cushion that is on the floor. Certainly, there are people who find it easier or necessary to use a chair when they're meditating, and that's okay. That's fine. But the technical ideal posture does begin on a cushion that's on the floor. And so if we assume that for now, then the first thing that you would want to think about are the legs. How are you positioning your legs in meditation? And there's three options for how we can do this, and they get progressively easier. So the most difficult way of positioning our legs is what's called the full Vajra position. And this requires the greatest degree of flexibility, where each foot is resting on each opposing thigh. So, of course, you can just imagine that that's quite a sharp angle from where your knee would normally want to be to where your, ankle is. It's quite high up, quite a steep kind of triangle shape. As I say, requires a very high degree of flexibility. And it's something that most people really find quite difficult. So the next, if that seems not possible for a person, then the next option is what is called the half lotus position. Um, and with that, you, if you can, you try to rest one uh, foot on one opposing thigh and then tuck the other foot in underneath the other thigh. So it's half of the full Vajra position is where one foot is resting on the opposing thigh and you tuck the other foot in. Still, even with that, you're talking about something that requires a high degree of flexibility for most people. So the third position that, is probably generally speaking the most common that people actually use is just a normal cross-legged position. Um, where you are on the cushion, so you have some elevation, and then you're just, your legs are just crossed underneath. Now, if we're starting there with, let's say we're sort of relatively not flexible, and we're just starting with that normal cross-legged position, there's not a lot of detailed instruction on progressing through different levels of flexibility within Tibetan Buddhism. Yoga is a Hindu system of kind of movement meditation. It, people generally find it, helpful for developing more flexibility. Tai Chi can be, helpful in developing Qigong. These are all kind of helpful mind body systems that can be useful in developing greater degrees of flexibility. Typically, what they say in terms of the Tibetan system is if you feel like cross-legged is the best you can do, then at the very beginning of every session, what you want to try is just to take one of your feet, whichever one maybe seems a little bit more flexible than the other, and try to pull it, kind of in the direction of the half lotus, um, up until it starts to become uncomfortable. You certainly don't want to progress into anything painful, but until you start to feel a stretch, until it starts to be a little bit uncomfortable, and then you try to maybe hold that for a few seconds if you can, a minute, and if you begin every single session like that, where you're kind of actively stretching your tendons and so on, then could be maybe in a couple of years, maybe you'll progress all the way to the full Vajra position. If you start every single session kind of trying to move in that direction. That's kind of the general advice. But, if people are coming to it later in life and that just sort of seems like not a useful endeavor, then, that's totally fine. If a person just does cross-legged, or if a person again is just doing a chair and that kind of seems like what it's going to be, then totally fine, not to worry. Um, but those are the three kind of general options that a person would have with their legs. Any thoughts or questions so far?
For me, I'm disabled. I spend most of my time in bed. So I don't really have the option of sitting any of those ways. And
Mhm.
even sitting in a chair isn't easy. So I just try to, when people say straighten up your spine, do this with your chin, feet hips width apart, I just try to do all of those things. And in
Yeah,
my
yeah,
mind, like before, I used to be able to sit, probably in a half lotus when I was much, much, much younger. So I try to picture it in my head and feel like that I'm actually doing it, even though I'm not.
yeah, yeah. And then people can use pillows to kind of, get things situated, support yourself in various ways. Um, yeah, whatever, we all kind of just do whatever we can do. Um,
Yes, I've heard that from several geshes. Just do what you can do
uh,
because you don't have a choice. Thank you.
okay. So then if we move upward, once we figured out whatever we're, doing with the legs, then we move upward and we think about, as you said, we think about keeping the spine straight. That's really kind of, one of the more instructions is we want to not be thinking about being leaning forward. We don't want to be, leaning too far back. We don't want to be leaning to the sides. We want to kind of keep a nice, straight, upright position with our upper body once we've figured out, whatever it is that we're doing with the legs. Um, and then going along with that, typically what we do in this tradition most generally is we take the right hand with the palm facing up and the left hand with the palm facing up. We put the right over the left, and then we just touch the thumbs. and we tuck that up against the body. So we don't like, not like down where the knees are, but just tucked right up against the belly. And you just let your belly be relaxed, let it hang, let it, do whatever it wants to do. So you don't try to, constrict your stomach muscles at all, but you just tuck it right up against your belly. As you're thinking about having a nice upright spine. So then, so we have our legs sorted and our torso is upright and our hands are up. So then what you want to do is you kind of want to, not have your, maybe kind of, stretch a little bit, kind of get comfortable. I always say you just kind of want to let the body figure out like how it's going to hang, how it's, the idea is really that your body is just kind of hanging on the skeleton. It's just sort of, if everything is aligned, if everything is kind of, you know, tight and, sort of just downward and stable, if you're creating a stable base, then your body's just sort of going to hang on itself. The skeleton is going to really support your body. You're not like actively supporting your body with your muscles. It's really, the weight of everything is just, it's sort of falling into a very stable container. Um, so then we do kind of keep the chin just, so the idea is that you're not looking, up, you're not looking down, but your chin is just ever so slightly tucked. Just, just a very, because if you just sort of think about this, then your chin's kind of like, up. So, but if you think about this, and then your chin is just ever so slightly tucked. So you're maintaining this upright posture and you just kind of tuck your chin ever so slightly. And then your gaze is sort of unfocused and sort of downward. So you're not looking at the ceiling, you're not looking straight. Your gaze is just ever so slightly unfocused and downward. Generally, what's recommended is that you have a slit of light at the bottom, so your eyelids, they don't, ideally they're not tightly, of course they shouldn't be tightly closed. Whether they're very, very lightly closed or whether you are maintaining a little bit of light, um, that's very personal, in terms of what feels comfortable, what feels good, for any given person. But generally the recommendation is to have slightly open eyes. Um, and particularly, it does relate to where a person's meditating, the amount of ambient light that's comfortable, for that. And of course, that can depend also on the time of day, how awake a person is. It's generally a very bad idea to go into a really dark room and then have your eyes closed. Um, that is not setting yourself up to be focused on your object. That's really you're gonna tend toward drowsiness if that's how you're setting up your session. So you just have to play around with the amount of ambient light in where you're typically going to be meditating, and then what feels right for you in terms of your choices about your eyelids. But you do want to have light coming in to your eyes in general. You want to be focused and uplifted by that rather than just dull and sleepy. Okay. Any thoughts or questions?
I have a question. I found it quite hard to keep my eyes closed during this. More of a sensory, like something's coming up on me. I don't know if there's any suggestions.
Um, so do you mean that you desire for them to be fully open? Like,
So usually, what I handle it is unfocused gaze, 6 feet ahead of me. Not, I still can see things, but I'm not focusing on them. So there is awareness what's going on, but not all the way down to there's just light coming through. I find it quite difficult because I'm aware of something's moving.
yeah, I wouldn't worry about it. I mean, you might want to think of, I mean, depending on where you're meditating and what's in your visual field, um, you might want to just kind of make it a little bit more boring or, like, because sometimes if something is flickering or if something is glittery or then it can be a little bit more distracting. Um, so if you have a lot of detailed information in your visual field, of course you'll habituate to it and it'll kind of fade due to just the force of habituation if it's kind of always in the same place and things are always the same sort of setup. But you might want to just think about like not having anything brightly colored or that is moving or like a creating a pattern that because then that might be a little bit too stimulating from a in your visual field if you have a little bit more of a detailed image than just kind of hazy light. But I don't think otherwise. I don't think it's something that is a problem. I mean, an issue. It can actually be helpful, in the longer term because you are actually having to reject information in order to concentrate the mind. And that actually can lead to stronger um, mindfulness. It can lead to, because I mean, in a way, you're making it a little bit more challenging for yourself because your visual field is giving you external information that you're having to ignore. And that can actually, that's sort of a more advanced technique for some people. So if that's what feels natural and comfortable for you, then I don't think that it needs to be changed, except for maybe some of the suggestions. But okay, so when we talk about meditation, this process of spending time intentionally cultivating virtue, that process, that formal process, is going to depend upon two interdependent skills that we grow in, that we cultivate in meditation. And these are concentration and mindfulness. I just use the word mindfulness. These are two um, functions of mind that we are tapping into. We, have them already, to some degree, but we need to cultivate greater mindfulness and greater concentration because the goal, as I said, if the goal is to familiarize our mind with virtue, then when distractions arise, we need to know that just that a distraction has arisen, and we need to move the mind back to the intended object. And we need to, so meditation is different than just kind of reading something or thinking about something because we're intentionally choosing or at least giving ourselves the instruction to avoid as best we can indulging in distraction. So distractions are going to arise. That's, because that's what the mind does. The mind thinks, just like the lungs, are related to breathing, the heart beats, that's its function. The function of the mind is to think. The function of the mind is to generate objects to be aware of. And it's not super accustomed to being put on a single object for long periods of time. It's not naturally very good at staying on an intended object for long periods of time, which we find out very quickly as soon as we try to do that. Distractions naturally arise. So, but it's critically important that we become aware that the mind had an intended object and that the mind is now focused on something that's other than that intended object. Um, and so that's mindfulness. That's the definition of mindfulness, is the awareness that the mind has moved off of whatever it was that we intended for the mind to be focused on. And then concentration is sort of that stickiness of the mind, the holding of the mind to the object itself. So when the mind is absorbed into the object, holding it there, keeping it there, is concentration. When that fails, when that concentration wanes, and a distraction arises, now we want to be alerted to that in the mind. We want the mind to quickly give us, a signal that this is happening. Because as we also know, it's often the case as we are beginning to meditate that it takes some minutes, often can be that we go into the session thinking, okay, it's going to be, this is what I'm going to do. And then we only notice that for the last 2 or 3 or 5 minutes, I've actually been planning, what I'm going to have for dinner, or I've been running through a presentation, or I've been thinking about a report, or I've been, you know, replaying some argument that I had with someone and how I'm going to get them back when I see them, or I should have said this, or why didn't I say that, or how dare they treat me like this, all of these stories that run through the mind instead of the intended object. We often find ourselves having engaged in that for a long time prior to, oh, right, this was supposed to be this object, or I was meant to be doing this instead. So ideally, we want to shorten that process. We want to, I mean, ultimately, we would like to be able to hold the mind on the object for as long as we might like without distraction arising, with the mind only being absorbed into the intended object. That's the ultimate goal. But that's a long process of training the mind to arrive at that goal. For now, really all we want to do is shorten the amount of time that the mind is distracted prior to being alerted, and then prior to that process of moving the mind back to the intended object. We would like, week by week, month by month, we would like those distractions to occur for shorter periods of time, for them to be less intense and of shorter duration, and less frequent. So the intensity, duration, and frequency of the distractions are all things that gradually we would like to see diminished over the course of the next years, as we're meditating. And that is our mindfulness, which is helping us to notice that something that's other than the intended object has arisen in the mind, and that's going to help us move back. And then when the intended object is present in the mind, then when we kind of narrow our focus and when we kind of hold to the object, then we're strengthening our concentration. So we have these two functions or two states of mind, two capacities of mind, and we're tapping into both of them and we're trying to strengthen both of those as we go along. And unfortunately, there's no shortcuts to that process. There's no real like secret to it. There's no like magic instruction. It's sort of like physical exercise. I mean, the corollary would be, physical exercise in the sense that if you want to get stronger, the only thing you can do is go to the place where they keep the heavy things and pick the heavy things up over and over again, right? And that's it. Like over time, your body will respond to that by getting stronger. Um, and when we give ourselves the instruction at the beginning of every single session of meditation that I will notice when my mind has become distracted, and when I notice that my mind has become distracted, I will move my mind back to the intended object. Then gradually the mind just gets really good at that. Um, and it's just repetition. It's just familiarity. There's nothing really other than, as I say, I mean, there's things that we are doing here that we're learning about that's helping us set ourselves up for success, like what we're doing with the body, um, some of the things that we'll talk about in terms of um, setting up the environment and so on. But really, it's just repetition. It's just this is a new habit, a new skill that we haven't practiced. And when we practice it, we'll get better at it over time. And there are really no shortcuts. There's really nothing that we can do other than have a daily, try to get to a daily practice and then just be really consistent with our daily practice. Because I think that's the single most important thing is, of course, if we don't have a daily practice, that's fine. But we want to think about, okay, well, what can I commit to? Can I commit to once a week for a month? And then can I commit to twice a week for a month? If you do that, then maybe that seems slow, but in 7 months, you're meditating every day, and then can you say, once you've gotten to there, then maybe for another 6 months, you just focus on that. And then, a year has gone by and now you have this really stable habit where you don't really skip days. And then can you say, okay, well, maybe twice a day. How do I get to twice a day? Maybe it'll take me another year or another 6 months or 8 months, but then and then you have your whole life, and in 2 years, if you take it in that really reasonable way, in 2 years, you've got a daily habit of twice a day, every day that you almost never skip. And that's incredibly valuable. So I think a lot of times people rush the process and they think, oh, well, it has to be, I have to do it all right now and so on. People do that with everything, with any kind of new, healthy, beneficial habit. I think that they go too quickly and then they feel it becomes overwhelming, it feels impossible, and then they just give up completely. But if you go in a really, really slow way, then it can feel like it's too slow, but in a pretty short amount of time, you've built this habit that is just ingrained. It's just like, it's like brushing your teeth. You don't have to think about, oh, well, tomorrow when I wake up, am I going to brush my teeth or not? Or like, what if I'm going to be, if I oversleep, will I not brush my teeth? Like, no, you do it. Like, it's just something that happens every single day. And, maybe if you have the flu, then maybe you don't. But otherwise, it's not something that's a big deal. It's just integrated into how you approach every single day of your life. And it's just stable and integrated, and it takes some time, but that's really the best way to get there, is to just think about what can I commit to, and then, right now, and then just gradually adding to that commitment over time, and, being patient with yourself, and, compassionate when maybe a week go, before it becomes second nature. Of course, you'll go off track in a week, and, but then it's not like you feel like, well, you didn't fail or anything. It's just, okay, that week wasn't what I wanted. And now this next week, what can I learn from that? What changes are necessary? Who do I need to talk to in my orbit to get on board, with my, how do I set aside time, and just, what caused the issues, and what are some good solutions, and how do I implement those solutions? So it's just thinking, problem solving, rather than this sort of all or nothing approach where it's just success or failure, thinking of it, just progressing over time. So these are, yeah, two complementary skills of mindfulness and interest and introspection, or mindfulness and concentration. Um, any thoughts or questions? No. Okay. So we'll go into two. Um, in a way, these are. Um, I mean, you could call them meditations. Um, we said in one way of thinking about meditation is familiarizing the mind with a virtuous object. And here, in either of these meditations, we don't really have a virtuous object, but the meditation itself can become virtuous if our reason for doing it is virtuous. Um, then, because we're going to um, engage in two uh, objects of meditation, and by their nature, neither of these objects have a virtuous quality. But if we're thinking, my goal in wanting to meditate is to develop my potential, to to become more kind and patient, and, all of these constructive, beneficial states that I'm trying to embody, then we can think about our familiarity with the mechanics of meditation as serving that goal. And so, even though that process of the mechanics of meditation are not themselves virtuous, um, they're in service of virtue in a deep way. So we can still think about it as being meditation. Okay, so we've talked a bit about the posture. So just try to get into a posture that feels stable, that feels comfortable, trying to integrate some of the things that we've talked about. And then the first meditation that we'll do, so meditation does always have an object. There's always something that the mind is being placed on. And so this is going to be a breathing meditation. And we're going to focus our awareness on the sensation of the air moving into, and then on the exhalation back out, the tip of the nostrils. So we're just becoming aware of what sensations arise in that one physical location during the entirety of the in-breath and the out breath. Not trying to control the breathing, breathing naturally, breathing normally. Giving ourselves the instruction that when anything other than that one physical sensation arises in the mind, we will notice that the mind has become distracted, and we will lift our awareness up from that distraction. And without experiencing judgment or frustration, seeing it as a completely natural part of the process, and just move the mind back to that physical sensation at the tip of the nostrils. And if it's helpful, on each exhalation, you could count mentally, thinking 1, 2, trying to go up to 10, and then back down to 1, labeling just each exhalation. And when you're ready, we'll come back together. Okay, so that technique, that approach is because the entirety of the instruction was to attend to just one physical sensation and try not to move away from that one physical sensation, to hold the mind. That is emphasizing the skill of concentration, right? You're just um, telling yourself that the object of this meditation is the physical sensation, not anywhere, not everywhere, not every kind of physical sensation, but only the physical sensation that's accompanying the breath, and only the physical sensation accompanying the breath at the point of the opening of the nostrils. Anything other than that is a distraction. And so if I'm going to try to just stay with that one experience, then I'm focusing on the skill of concentration. I'm trying to deepen my ability to stick the mind to an intended object. Um, if we were to have a broader perspective, if, for example, sometimes in meditation, a person might take the body as the object, the body generally as the object. And so there's still a, um, or the mind, those are two types of objects that's quite common for a meditator to take as an object. And so if you take the body as the object, then of course, still, then, thinking about what's happening later is a distraction. Thinking about what happened earlier is a distraction. Thinking about how you would wish to be doing anything other than what you're doing is a distraction. But if you've taken the body as the object, then whatever's occurring in the body as a whole is fair game, right? If you notice that there's pain in the knee, and then you move your awareness to the pain in the knee, and then you're kind of noticing that, and then you might notice, well, there's heat arising in the back, or there's a feeling of sensation of cold or an itch in your nose is starting to itch. Then you might move your awareness to the nose. um, that is more so uh, going to emphasize the skill of mindfulness, um, because you're allowing yourself to have a little bit more broad of a focus. You're noticing what is arising within the field of your experience. Maybe it's a pain, and then maybe it changes to this, maybe it changes to that, and you're just staying present with whatever arises. Or if it's the mind as the object, then you generally, when you take the mind as the object, you still give yourself the instruction to not energize um, thoughts or feelings or memories that arise. You just kind of notice. In both of these, really, the instruction is to notice and kind of just stay present without kind of lending more fuel to whatever is arising. So if you think about dinner, if you've given yourself the instruction to take the mind as the object, then yeah, you might notice that you're thinking about dinner, but you just kind of watch that thought arise. You don't then kind of start driving that train of thought by adding intentionally, oh, I need to go to the store. I'm out of this. I need, I'm in the mood for this. I'm feeling like Thai today. And then, so you're not, but you're just like, oh, this is happening in my mind. This thought is happening in my mind. And I'm just going to attend, like they describe it as like watching people pass on the sidewalk as you're just kind of looking through a window and you're just noticing cars going by. You're like, oh, that's a red car that just drove by. You don't then think, oh, I don't really like red cars, or I used to have a red car, or this particular kind of red car is the kind of car that I would like to purchase next. You're just like, oh, a red car drove by, and then a truck drove by, and so on. Um, that kind of way of relating is a bit broader, and it's going to emphasize the skill of mindfulness, because mindfulness is occurring it's occurring in the background of all of our sessions of meditation, and it's kind of watching how that meditation is going. It's sort of a corner of your mind that's turned inward and is observing whether or not the mind is attending to the object or the mind is attending to a distraction. Um, and so when we kind of tune in to, what is occurring in the body, what is occurring in the mind, and we stay present with how that is evolving, how that is changing, what is, you know, still there are rules, right? It's still meditation, it's still not anything goes. But you're flowing, which is different than saying my object is just this one sensation in this one place when the breath is present. Um, that is much more specific. That's not kind of flowing with, okay, now it's like this, now it's like this, now this other thing is happening, now I'm thinking about this, or now this part of the body or that part of the body. So one is going to emphasize concentration, and the other is going to emphasize mindfulness, or introspective awareness is another way of saying mindfulness, talking about mindfulness. Uh, so that's called like a bare attention exercise, when you take the body or you take the mind as the object, and you're okay with what you're attending to evolving, changing, flowing over the course of the session, as long as it's not something that's outside of that scope. If you've taken the mind as the object, then um, you know pretty much anything is fair game, except you don't want to be actively elaborating on what's occurring. You're barely noticing, you're barely attending to that which is arising. Okay. Any thoughts or questions about what we've covered today?
How do you stop? So you got single point meditation, concentration, and then you have where you're just solely paying attention to what occurs. How do you use single point concentration a little bit to kind of remind yourself these thoughts, not to fall too deep into them, almost like a dream state? They become so rich and lively. Is there a mix of those two where it's a kind of a reminder, don't get caught too much into these?
Um, so I mean, really, the, it's the mind itself that eventually will kind of get with the program when you, um, as soon as you observe that something else is happening in the mind, really all you have to do is just let it go, right? You don't necessarily have to do that in a formulaic way, or um, using any kind of keywords, or um, some people will um, label it as thinking, they'll just say thinking, um, and then go back. But really it's just letting go. It's just stopping. I mean, it's literally like you are looking at one thing on your desk, and there's another thing also on your desk, and you're just moving your eyes, right? This thing is here, like there is a pencil and there is a pen. They're both validly on your desk, and your eyes can be looking here or they can be looking there. But you said, I really just want to be looking at the pen. And then so when your eyes are now over here, you just literally physically reorient your eyes back to this other object. So it's just a sense of letting it go and moving the attention back. Um, and then there can be when when you are moving into kind of concentration, it's you have to strike a balance between the um, kind of how grasping the mind is to the object, how tight, how kind of narrow is the mind. Um, oh, sorry, we start at 7, these classes. So no worries. It's recorded if you, it'll be on YouTube if you want to watch it. But yeah, we start at 7. Um, no worries. Yeah, so because with concentration, there is an element to it of kind of like I was saying, when we distinguish concentration from mindfulness, it kind of it relates to how kind of focused is the beam of our attention, right? When we're doing the bare awareness exercise, the beam of our awareness is, kind of more like a spotlight. It's, it has sort of a larger focal area. When we are just thinking about the breath, the focal point of our awareness is kind of more like a laser. And it has a sort of a feeling to it in the mind of like, kind of we know that feeling kind of like when you're trying to read in a noisy environment, and you're sort of actively rejecting, what's happening, and you're kind of or you're on a deadline, you have to write a certain thing by a certain time, so you're like buckling down, and you're just kind of, um, and we do have to some degree that's part of how it goes, but also if we do too much of that, then we get a little bit too uptight in our meditation, and it becomes it becomes a little bit too grasping. So we do want to hold on to the object, but not so tightly. And a lot of times you can it will actually happen in in the body. The muscles of the body will actually begin to tense when or your jaw, or your eyes, will actually the muscles will tense. And that can be an indication that you're holding a little bit too tightly, because that over time can actually it can cause the experience of meditation to not be really very pleasant. And if it isn't pleasant, you probably won't do it for a long, kind of that white knuckling approach is what I mean by that. We really can't white knuckle our meditations. We can for short periods of time, but probably will burn out if that's how we're approaching meditation, is sort of that. So we want it to have sort of a quality of playfulness, I would say. I mean, that doesn't mean that we don't take the instruction seriously, that we're not making effort, um, but we want to think of it as pleasant, as fun, as something that we get to go and do, not something that we have to go and do. So if we notice, I think it's important that, that if we notice that we're holding so tightly that we're actually getting our shoulders are cramping or our jaw is tightening or we're clenching or, and we're like, oh, I have to stay so concentrated. That's something that we should address by trying to be a little bit more light in our touching to the object. So really, it's just noticing and refocusing, just like, you know, I'm just letting this go and I'm picking this up. I'm putting this down and I'm picking this up. Just like with a weight, you know, you release it and then you pick it up and you release it. Except the whole, I mean, the weight is intentional, but and the distractions are not. But it's just, you're just having this sense of, you know, defocusing, of just, you know, it's not like you're not beating yourself up. You're not, because again, it would be bizarre if this wasn't happening. It's natural, it's normal, it's a part of the process that something other than the intended object is going to be present in the mind. Um, and if we start like telling ourselves another conceptual story about, oh, this means it's not going well, or oh, this means I'm not good at this, um, then again, we're going to start associating our sessions of meditation with with negative feelings about ourself as a meditator. Um, and that's not constructive at all either. So um, it's a very non-judgmental, non-moralistic, just like this is what I was thinking about, and now I'm going back to this, and now this is again what I'm thinking about. But again, once again, you know, here we are, and I'm going to go back to the object, and I'm going to just keep going back to the object, no matter how many times something other than the object arises in my mind. I'm just going to keep moving my attention back to the object. And then it's just the mind, somehow the mind gets with the program over time. The mind kind of figures out, well, I'm not getting away with this. Like, I'm not actually, you know, able to do this. And so maybe what I'm keep getting put on, maybe that's where I should stay, you know, because that is kind of that's sort of the groove that is being worn into the mind, is just staying with the object. And then your mind just does. I mean, it takes years, but your mind will just, as I said, the intensity, the frequency, and the duration of the distractions will just naturally all shift into greater focused attention on the object. Um, but yeah, we don't want to think about like, I'm a bad, you know, because this is happening, this is a bad. It's actually, the more distractions we notice, the better that session is, because, you know, if we're doing a 10-minute meditation and we only noticed one distraction, that was because 9.5 minutes of the 10 minutes we were absorbed in not the object, and we just noticed the one movement from not the object to back to the object. If we noticed 100 distractions, then that means that, you know, we kept moving the mind back to the object, which is like doing 100 reps at the gym rather than one. You know, that's better. That's actually good. We want that. So yeah. And I think too, like naturally, we, I think a consequence of that is that we get control over the process of what arises. You know, when thoughts and feelings and so on, when they arise for us now, they feel like they have their own solidity. They feel like they have their own kind of weight and importance. Um, and when we just don't energize them, when we just don't follow them, then we get an insight that they are just kind of a movement of energy in the mind, that they're just sort of this thing that's bubbling up, and then it, you know, if I just don't attend, if I just don't energize, if I just don't follow, and I add the next thought or the next impulse to it, that train, if I don't keep energizing it, then it will dissipate kind of on its own, and I can easily move the mind back. So that, kind of the illusion-like quality of our thoughts and our feelings and our impulses, that insight is something that begins to dawn in the mind, too, when we take control of what the mind is doing in a more and more intentional way, gradually. Any thoughts or questions? No, well, that's all I had for today. So as I mentioned, we meet the remaining Fridays in August for Meditation 101. So if there are any other final questions, we can address them or we can adjourn. Yes,
I don't
Kimberly.
have any questions. Oh, I just wanted to say thank you very much, Venerable, for this evening.
Sure. All right. Well, I hope to see everyone back next Friday. Have a good weekend.
Night, everybody.
Thank you, Venerable. Thank you, everybody. Good night.